Hello. Hello, of course. Welcome on in. What's good? Good-natured men and women of the program, of the fight, of the cause. It's good to be of the cause, before the cause, before the cause. Be before the cause, be after the cause. But but never be against the cause. That's what I wanted to say to you. So let me explain. Let me explain myself. I made a TikTok recently and it got 120 likes. Yeah, I'm so good. That's how I feel in my heart. Wow, 120. How'd you do it? Well, it's a lot of years of hard work. I recorded myself giving my own commentary of golf broadcast. I wish that I could just broadcast instead of the broadcasters for any sporting event, but obviously like NBC and CBS have the rights to all of that, and so they would come after me. But maybe I could do something like that on Discord, because Discord, no rules. I could broadcast myself making fun of sporting events on Discord. I'm just not jumping into that pool yet. There's a lot of things I'm not diving into. I'm diving in, I'm going deep. In over my head, I want to be. I'm not going to go through the rest of that song. If you grew up in a Christian family in the early 2000s in the Midwest, then you know what that song is. They play it on the fish. Speaking of the fish, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ associates himself with fish. But I made the TikTok, and one of the comments that somebody left was, "This video confuses me." And that got me thinking, like, about how very often in life, this is feedback that I get, that something that I'm trying to do is just confusing, including, like, probably when I make this podcast, any people who listen to it, they don't really know where I'm coming from, or they don't know what I'm trying to do. And it probably just sounds confusing because it would be difficult to discern what is the point. And like, I realized that I should take it upon myself maybe more to consider this feedback, that maybe I'm confusing to people, because to me, I feel like people should know what I'm talking about, but actually they don't. But it's like, it's kind of beyond me. I don't understand why people don't know what I mean when I'm saying, but oftentimes they don't. Like, that's often the case. People are like, I don't know what you mean, or like, are you being serious or not? And so rather than criticize this feedback I get, I realized that maybe I should try to figure out, or maybe I should like try to explain what I'm doing. But like on this podcast, for example, I feel like I should be cryptic, or just in life, I feel like maybe the point is to be cryptic, or it's like, oh, you don't want to be figured out. Like I am trying to be confusing. That's part of it. But really it's like, what if I died, and what if I lived my whole life and then I died, and then people never got the joke, or whatever the joke is, whatever I'm saying? What if people never understood it, which is a possibility? Like, that occurred to me when I read that comment. I was like, you know what? It's possible that people just like, I mean, not that everybody doesn't understand me. People do, definitely. But like, if I'm trying to be mainstream appeal, then, which maybe that's impossible for someone like me. Maybe it is possible. I don't really know. But then I have to, like, I should explain what I'm doing, is what I'm saying. So let me explain my most previous episode, or break down some of the things that I said, because I did watch it back just one time. And I know I know the things that I said, or that I could bring up and explain. Let me explain that when I talk about dogs and dog people, I don't really know why. I mean, it might sound like I'm getting heated, or I'm trying to start a fight with dog people. It's the reason I do that is because I talk about dogs. I'm making this podcast called Currency. For some reason, as long as I titled it Currency, it does bring up certain things that I find to be more current or more money making. Like, not that dogs make money, but they kind of do, because you can get a million likes on TikTok with a good dog video over and over again, or on YouTube. And YouTube and TikTok translates into money for you. And so, I mean, in recent years in human history, we see how you can monetize these. But it's like, this happens over and over again ad infinitum. There's no point at which people will be sick of dogs. Even though dogs do similar things all the time, you can make so many different TikToks that would get a million views from your dog doing something, because every dog is different. And they have their own quirks, and every one of those quirks is funny to people, or it's worth like a million likes if it's like a genuine quirk. And so it's like dogs are kind of money making, and this just arises for me to speak about, as long as this is what the title of the podcast is. And so, like, you might listen to an episode of my, like the last one I did is called Interesting. I am trying to make an episode. To me, what I'm doing is like, kind of like, to me, it's like a work of art or something, because what I try to do is talk about a subject, but also, I mean, in this case for this podcast, yeah, like, I don't want to give everything away, but also I recognize that more people could be listening. Like, there's not enough people listening that it's like, I need to keep it a secret. Like, I'm being too cryptic, so I should be more revealing. So I'll be naked in the next one. I'll get progressively more naked as this podcast goes on, in an attempt to be more revealing. But you only ever see my torso, so I'm just wearing a shirt right now. And no, I'm not. I'm just kidding. But anyway, like, what you need to understand is that if I make an episode like Interesting, in this podcast, which I'm doing things a little different from when I was making Identity, I started a new podcast. And so it's a little bit different, where I am trying to, now I'm making episodes about things that I am more so, and Identity wasn't really like that. But so what I'm trying to do is, like, what's artistic about it to me is if you can make an episode where you're talking about the subject, but also the episode is an example of that same thing that you're talking about. That's an important thing that I try to do. Also, I wanted to have a theme, and in the previous episode, as I was talking out loud about what I'm doing when I make this podcast, or what is my motivation, because I still am a little bit unclear. Also, I speak all of these things off the top of my head. Generally, like, the episode is, I'm just talking about it. I don't know sometimes what I'm going to talk about beforehand, but even if I do know what I'm going to talk about beforehand, I don't know what words I'm going to say. I don't even have bullet points in front of me. A couple of occasions in the past, I have used bullet points for, like, if it was an episode I wanted to, like, be on theme or something. But, like, I'm saying that, but anyway, so the dogs, the reason I bring up dog people, like, I think about it every time when I criticize, like, the dog world, that I know all these people who have dogs, and I feel bad. And that is the penalty I pay. The guilt I feel days after releasing an episode where I criticize dogs. I feel bad about, like, now if people I know see that, they're going to think I'm attacking them or something. And it's really, like, it might sound heated toward dog people, and it is. And it's like, I do criticize them harshly. But it's not, it's just sometimes, like, I figure that people I know would watch this, and then they expect a certain thing out of me. And then, or anybody, doesn't have to be people I know. It's just like, sometimes I get into this territory where I think that people are expecting a certain character that they've seen in the past, or it's like, I want to be accepted as, like, what would normally ensue if you started talking about dogs and were mean about it. Then it's like, it's hard for me to not slip into a character that just hates everybody or something like that, because that's what people would think it was. The reason I talk about dogs is because I have a dog, and literally, like, in my brain all the time, my brain is telling me, get rid of that dog. And so when I talk about dog people, it's kind of like projected or misplaced anger that I have toward the entire dog community that's kind of misplaced from me just hating the one dog. But I don't hate him all the time. Like, maybe I'm a little bipolar or something. Or it's like I like him a lot sometimes, and then I hate him a lot other times. And it's like in my brain during certain times, maybe like half the time, or maybe like 15% of the time, my brain is like telling me to get rid of this dog, or like he's walking around in my house like this is an issue. And since I'm not allowed to do that because like socially it seems unacceptable to me, to get rid of him after I've owned him for a couple of years, I I'm not able to do that, and then it kind of like the thoughts just kind of turn into resentment, and then it's like manifests itself as worse thoughts. Like, actually, since I can't get rid of him, and this is what my brain is telling me to do all the time, and I'm just resisting what like know that I have to do, because it's like I keep telling myself to do that for whatever reason. I don't know why. I can't stop it. I'm powerless to stop it. Stop thinking like get rid of him. Because of that, it kind of manifests itself later as like, now I just want to throw bricks at his face all the time. And so my problem is I can't be the first person that this has happened to. And I'm not. Like, I guess that's why a lot of people beat their dog or something. I don't do that. Because I know it's against the law. And so then it just kind of like makes me angrier and angrier, really. Because it's against the law. And so I wouldn't like, because I'm a good person, what I like to do is get on here and explain my example in life, so that other people who go through this situation can hear this, because I don't hear this anywhere else, that anybody has this problem where they're like angry at their dog because everybody just says how great it is. And that kind of pisses me off. And so I just want to share this so that other people aren't alone in this experience, the way that I feel alone, because I'm a good person. So got that out of the way, because I'm a good person. But let me also explain in the previous episode. The previous episode was a little bit more jokey. Some episodes I do are more serious. Some of them are more jokes. But like when I said that it's like Elizabeth Holmes started Theranos, which is a fake company, and then it rose to $9 billion. Then it turned out that she was a fraud. So I was like kind of comparing myself to her, like, oh, maybe my podcast is a fraud. That's sort of like a joke I'm doing. It's a joke because it's not actually like that. Also, I'm speaking off the top of my head, so I just kind of like say a lot of random things that I thought of only for the first time while I was thinking of them. But like, I make that comparison because it's a joke to me. I know that it isn't like that because Elizabeth Holmes didn't actually produce anything. The product that she had, that like the $9 billion was centered around, that her company ended up being worth, the product didn't even work. So she didn't even have a functioning product. I produce something every time, like, obviously, or to me that's obvious. And so it's okay if I compare myself to Elizabeth Holmes. Like, everybody should know that it isn't actually like that, because I produce an episode every time. It's clear what I am producing. And so in the same respect, I like to joke about that. I do like to appear like a guy who's falling apart. That holds a special place in my heart, even on stage sometimes. But it's like, it's not something I'm pretending to do. I am kind of a guy that's falling apart. But because I'm just like a little unstable or turbulent. But so it's like, if I ended up that way on stage doing comedy, it's kind of like intentional but not intentional. But like, what's important about it is that I don't have to be that way all the time, because that's not actually what I'm interested in communicating. But so it's like I do I have a hard time trying to think of it like it's just a general audience and separate out that people I know hear it. And sometimes I think it's like a fight maybe between people I know, that even though it isn't, like that's just kind of like paranoia I'm making up in my own head. But I imagine that they want me to look bad or something. And so, or say that I'm like a faker. But to me, it's kind of like a joke to say that it's it's like like for pretend, like I was saying in the last, or kind of alluding to, or have alluded to, like it's kind of like that's maybe what people would want it to be, is that it turns out I was faking. But of course that isn't the case, because it's clear what I'm producing every time, because I already did it, or I already do talk for an hour in a row. Not that I intended all of that when I was talking, like this is how it will, these are all of my intentions or something. Those aren't really my intentions, but I do have intentions. But like as I make an episode, I don't really complete the product until I know what the title is, and I titled them after I spoke. And it's like, but the entirety of the podcast doesn't work that way. I already know the title, but then because I know the title, I do work underneath it, and then what arises as a result of that are, I'm speaking of of current things, but also if I am speaking on behalf of currency, I have to talk about the most current things, like Jesus Christ, or like dogs, and and like Jesus Christ, or like dogs. So let me talk about the camel going through the eye of the needle passage from the Bible, which states a couple of things. But it's like people who are biblical, people who are secular, bring up this passage, even if you're not really Christian. Like the world brings up this passage. I feel like I hear about it a lot, or people are always bringing it up. It stands out in the Bible. And it's interesting how in the Bible there are certain passages, or just certain verses, that surface or gain visibility, gain popularity, and then there's all these verses that we completely ignore, like the Christian world ignores, because they're just, we consider them to be like filler. But then there's the celebrity verses that surface, that are popular, that gain visibility and get memed to everybody, that are more memorable, that we pass around. They're more current. They're more, because they get passed around and they're more in circulation. The more that something is passed around, is the more liquid that it is. And I'm just making the connection now between liquidity and visibility and popularity and currency. That's something that is in motion more. The verses that are the most popular are the ones that are in motion the most, because they're like, they're given to everybody, or everybody. You can find them in so many places. If you can find it in lots of places, it's more liquid. Like the US dollar is the currency in the world that can be found in the most places. I would argue this is grounds to say it is the most liquid currency, but the best currency. The best currency is the most liquid currency. Coincidental or not, current in water, like, and money is like water, because it's always moving. But camel goes through the eye of the needle. Let me interpret this passage for you, because there's very many interpretations of it, or like people can't figure it out, and that's why it keeps coming up, especially in the Christian church. But the thing is that the Christian church talks about it a lot. There's a lot of noise about it, because I think because they have problems being like rich people, and then the passage is saying it's harder for a rich man to go through the eye of it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. Is this parable? It's this parable in the Bible that Jesus says. That's what Jesus said. Basically, here's how the story goes. A rich man comes up to Jesus, and he's like, how can I follow you, or how can I enter the kingdom of heaven? And following Jesus, as spoken in this passage, you'll find out, is very similar to entering the kingdom of heaven. They're almost like the same thing. But the rich man is like, Jesus, how can I enter heaven? or how can I be saved? Basically, the passage also says that that's an equivalent thing in the same passage. And he's like, how can I be saved? And Jesus is like, well, you have to keep, in order to be saved, you have to keep all of your commandments. You have to not commit adultery. You have to not steal. You have to whatever, like commandments that are known biblical commandments. I don't know if they were all like the 10 commandments mentioned earlier in the Bible, but the rich man is like, I have kept all of my commandments since I was a boy. And then the next verse says, Jesus heard him say this, and he loved this man. Jesus loved this man for keeping all of his commandments. This is something that is spoken. And Jesus heard this, he loved this man. And then Jesus is like, tell you what, why don't you, so you've kept all your commandments, here's one other thing you can do. And Jesus is like trying to throw this guy with this. He's like, sell all of your possessions and then you can follow me. And the rich man is like, fuck, you got me because I'm rich. I can't sell all my possessions. And then Jesus says to his disciples, and I feel like in Mark, there's a couple passages where it mentions this, Mark 10 and Matthew 19. And I feel like in Mark 10, it sounded like Jesus was like laughing or joking, like he beat him or something. Let me look that up real quick. But Jesus says to his disciples, it's harder for a rich man, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And in Matthew 19, it says before that, Jesus is like, I tell you this, it is very hard for a rich man to go into the kingdom of God. And then he says, it is harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, etc. Like he prefaces it in Matthew 19 with that it is hard. And then he's like, speaking hyperbolically, he's like, it is harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go into the kingdom of God. But the point of him saying that is just that it is impossible for a rich man. It is nearly impossible. But since he says in Matthew 19, like, I tell you this, it is hard. He's basically saying it's difficult. And then like speaking hyperbolically because he's just kind of like shit talking a little bit. He's like, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle because he beat this guy who came up to him, because this is a fight, this is a challenge, and this rich man is a worthy competitor because he has kept all of his commandments. And this is why Jesus loves him, is because Jesus is the same as him, because Jesus has also kept all of his commandments since he was a boy. This is why Jesus loves him. It's speaking to the similarity between them. Like, you're going to be connected to the people that are very, very much like you. And so like Jesus doesn't run into this very often. And so it's like peculiar, or it's kind of rare. And so it's like rare enough that he loves him. And so it's almost like this guy coming up to Jesus is like a competitor to Jesus, because it's almost like he's done all of the things that Jesus did, or like he's doing what Jesus does to make himself significant. But Jesus is like, well, you're not as good as me if you didn't sell all of your possessions. Because Jesus is saying like, well, I am better than you. I have kept all my commandments, but what distinguishes me from you is that I sold all my possessions. And it's like an allusion to how Jesus came down from heaven, is the Son of God, and he gave all of that up just to be a man. So Jesus accomplished this and has the authority to speak on it. And the Gospels are often speaking about how Jesus has the authority, and the disciples are surprised by the authority, and the Pharisees and people surrounding, they're surprised with the authority with which Jesus speaks. So it's like Jesus says it and people know that he deserves to say it or something. Like, Jesus actually deserves to say this. You can only follow me, and I am the leader because I've accomplished this, and you are under my authority, as long as you didn't also sell all of your possessions, because that's what I did. So it's like, it's actually not impossible because Jesus did it. But he is speaking hyperbolically, like it's basically impossible to do that. It's almost as impossible as becoming Jesus or becoming the greatest guy ever. And I would argue that Christ is the greatest guy ever. I don't know how you could say somebody else. Like, who would you say is better? I'd say that Jesus Christ and other religious aficionados that we remember, they're kind of like political geniuses. Like, Jesus is like a political genius, maybe the best ever, probably. He's like the greatest because he got he got all of us to name time after him. But who would you say compares to that? Maybe Muhammad, maybe Gandhi, but really Muhammad and Gandhi aren't. They don't get more credit than Jesus. Jesus gets the most credit if there is, as an individual. If there's one individual we can look to, like who is the man? Who would you say besides Jesus? Probably Jesus. But like being the man is so sought after, especially by men. And so like, yeah, maybe if you believe in Islam, you'd be like, Muhammad is the greatest. But I'm saying that overall, as far as the entire world is concerned, I know that I'm biased because I do come from a Christian background, and I'm not trying to. But like bias aside, I think that since we named all time after Jesus, you'd say that he probably won, or like he's that guy. You know, he's the guy, he's that guy. But like and so that's why he has all this authority or did whatever. And so like Muhammad is like a political genius, and Gandhi is like a political genius. And the same way as that Hitler is a political genius, it's just Hitler did it in infamy instead of fame, or he got negative attention. He's kind of like Rebecca Black as opposed to Madonna. Madonna gets attention for making great pop music. Rebecca Black gets attention for making terrible pop music. Hitler is the same way, and war is kind of like artistic. It's like it's kind of ruthless to say this, but World War II is like a giant art project created by the entire world, that configured collectively by the entire world. But Hitler is an artist, and he was a painter when he was younger. And it's always like it's like you got to watch out for those weird white guys that's, if they get a few drinks in them, they start saying that, well, Hitler wasn't such a bad guy, you know. And that's what I'm trying to avoid today. But like it takes a lot of artistic ability to create your own political party, and then have a vision for it, get people on board with it such that that political party ends up having the most power after like 10 years, whereas like 10 years before that, it didn't even exist. Like to have that vision and create a new political party and then have that rise to power. Think of if that was possible in America. It's impossible. Nobody's going to make a new political party over here, and then all of a sudden that is the party that has all the power. So it's like, I guess Germany kind of offered the ability for that to happen, but you have to have a vision for that. And it's like, it's kind of like art. But so it's like Hitler is kind of like almost like an antichrist figure. He's a negative Jesus. And so anyway, Jesus says this is harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Here's what this passage means. Jesus is talking about how rich men can't enter the kingdom of heaven because they're already in it. And he emphasizes entering it. Entering the kingdom of heaven is the important point of emphasis, because the rich man is basically already there. The rich man is already saved. He's already rich, but entering the kingdom of heaven is the same thing as being rich or being saved. But after Jesus said, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, it says the disciples were astonished, and they said, Jesus, how will anybody be saved then? And this just goes to show that the passage is communicating this is an impossible task, rather than that, like, oh, well, maybe a rich man can get into heaven, which is what, from what I've gathered, the modern day Christian church tries to interpret this passage to say that, well, it's not exactly that a rich man can't get into the kingdom of heaven, even though that's exactly what the Bible is saying. But it's kind of like modern day Christians do not want to give up their money for things besides like the church, and they give it up to the church because they think they'll be blessed later on. And like modern day Christians are really like penny pinching. But I mean, if you go into the Christian church, it's because you want safety, you want to be like the son of the king, you want to reign in eternity forever and like get crowns in heaven. You want the ultimate reward, which is like an eternity of rewards, which is a better reward than anything you find on earth. And that's why you get into Christianity, is like you get saved so that you will go to heaven for eternity. And so Christians have a hard time, since modern day Christians are all saved, they have a hard time looking at this passage and saying like, because they see themselves as the rich man, and so then they have to come up with some other reason, like, oh, it is possible for a camel to go through. Christians come up with interpretations like, well, what this passage is saying is there's a gate in Jerusalem that back in the day used to be wide enough, and they called it like something that sounded like a needle, and a camel could, even though a camel probably couldn't go through it, it maybe could, rather than saying like, it means the eye of a sewing needle. And from what I've read about it, it would be really easy, really feasible to interpret the passage as what they mean is just a sewing needle, just as you would think it sounds. But just as you'd think it sounds, the passage is just saying it's basically impossible. But Christians try to get out of it because they're kind of in the position of the rich man because they're already saved, which is the same as the rich man. He's already saved. But this is what's important about the passage, is Jesus making this distinction about how it's impossible to enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you look at the earlier in the chapter, both in Mark 10 and Matthew 19, in this same chapter, to provide context for this, is the passage about the little children coming to Jesus, and the disciples rebuke the kids. They're like, no, don't come to Jesus. Jesus is like, let the little children come to me, because these are the kinds of people that enter the kingdom of heaven. But what he's saying is that you kind of have to have the faith of a child in order to receive something. But it's a passage about how entering into the kingdom of heaven means that you have to not be in it beforehand. Being saved automatically implies that you're being saved from something. But Jesus is saying that you have to you have to be a sinner first, or like you have to be somebody in a position able to receive it or get better. But basically the passage is saying like, your life won't get any better if it's already as good as it's going to get, or something like that. And it kind of goes along with other times where it says the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And like Jesus is saying, you want to be in a position where your life can always get better. You can't be in that position where you're already a rich man. It's impossible if you're rich to enter into it because you're already there. Anything else I want to say about that? Jesus, the disciples, Jesus is cool, but it's like Jesus is cool, and it's kind of like Jesus fended off this guy because he's better than him in this respect, or he's better than everybody. But it's talking about like meeting Jesus or getting there is about, you have to come from a place where you weren't, and then you have to receive it. But once the disciples said, well, Jesus, then how can anybody be saved? And they're astonished because Jesus said another one of those things where they're like, how does he have the authority to say this? And Jesus says in response to them, well, with man, things are impossible, but with God, all things are possible. But in other words, in the direction of God, and it's talking about, there's these two relative truths, the truth of man and the truth of God. The truth of man has fewer possibilities. The truth of God is more freeing. And this is like, he's aligning a spectrum where at one end of the spectrum you have the truth of man, the other end you have the truth of God. And if you go in the direction towards the truth of God from the truth of man, like from man to God, you go in the direction of freedom and more possibilities. From God to man, it goes in a more impossible direction. So it's speaking about the direction of like, you have to go or like move up the, like receiving it. And so there's that. There's that. I'm trying to remember all the things that I for sure wanted to say about this. So there's the passage about Jesus doing that. There's the kingdom. It's harder for a rich man. But so Jesus is innocent. Jesus is innocent the same way that this man is. But Jesus is like the ultimate innocent because he followed his father's instructions every day of his life until he died. And it's like, maybe he's an example of somebody who is completely innocent, who never sins. You know what happens to that guy? He gets crucified by people around him because at some point the other people around him can't take it anymore because he's better than them. At some point, the people attack him for it. So I guess if you sin, you live longer. But so Jesus did that, but like Jesus is kind of the guy and he is the man, and to the point that, and we're living in an era defined by him, and I think that that's important. And there are other people that are speaking to this same thing about this time. For example, Jordan Peterson is bringing up quite a bit how the Bible is like so standard to our way of life that you can't ignore it. But it's like he's saying the things that Christians are saying, but he's saying it in a kind of more modern way. And I feel like when the Bible says you can't go to heaven except through Christ, I think that this is sort of true of the world we live in. Like maybe the world needs to recognize something about their relationship to Christ, because everybody does have a relationship to it, because every single year that happens, we keep counting as years. Every year that happens, we're like, that's another year that Jesus is alive, basically. And that's what we think, or that's what Christians have convinced us of, or people that wanted to name time after Jesus have convinced us of, that he's still alive. That's why we keep counting his years. And he's still alive. But like what I'm saying right now is that we're in an era defined by Christ, and coincidentally, we're kind of in an era defined by men. And I would go so far as to say that I don't know how it works if you are both a Christian and somebody who doesn't like the patriarchy. That should be impossible, because I think that a lot of the power of the patriarchy is because of Jesus Christ and the era that we're defined. We're in an era defined by man, and also it's an era defined by who's the greatest man, and as long as he is the guy we're naming time after, and this is the era. This is like the era of competition among men, and where men are valued more, because we're naming time after one man, and that's the reward for being the best man. And so what ensues is an era defined by men, and it is the patriarchy. Basically, the only thing that's lasted as long as the patriarchy is Jesus. And so don't tell me you're a Christ follower but also a feminist, because it's like they're kind of like men in some senses get power off of the title. The fact, like, if you want to go after men go after their hero, and nobody goes after the hero. He mostly goes untouched. And also, if you try to criticize Jesus, people will come after you. Interestingly enough, in this world that's so open-minded to women, in public places you can't. Well, like, it's not. You're still not supposed to criticize Jesus. Like, it's not just at a church that you can't do that. Is what I'm saying. Jesus. I wanted to say that, but like, it's the patriarchy, Jesus, and it's really like the way that I see it is that the world is, we're under the umbrella of Christ, whether we like it or not. And like, you can always say that, well, just as many other religions are as good. And if you're arguing that Christ is the best, you're just really biased to your religion. And so that would be something to watch out for. It's just that the world is actively ignoring that we keep counting Jesus's years. And it's really like, if humanity was a psychiatrist, they would, I mean, not a psychiatrist. If humanity was one person, if it was an individual, and it saw a psychiatrist or a counselor or a therapist, if humanity saw a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist would be like, so what's this whole deal with Jesus? Why do you feel like you always have to be concealed by that? Because that's what I think it is. And when you look at passages in the Bible that say, you can't come to the Father except through me, like, maybe there's something very real about that. Like, the world is always stuck under this inhibited border named Jesus, authority, and inhibiting border that we're stuck within it, whether we like it or not. Like, obviously you can get outside of it, but it's like, if you're somebody who is actively like, no, I don't go to church, I'm not a Jesus follower, the Jesus followers have grounds to call you a sinner, because you're kind of like, you kind of are a sinner because you're actively ignoring what era that we're living in. It's like, it's kind of hard, like, well, you are one, And I'd say that they have legal grounds to do that, do Christians, because we are in the era defined by the guy. It's just like you can't just say that he doesn't mean anything. It's the same with the Bible. You can say the Bible doesn't mean anything, but the Bible, as I was watching, Jordan Peterson was on Andrew Schultz's podcast, and they were talking about the Bible, and Jordan Peterson said something, and Andrew Schultz was like, so the Bible is kind of like the greatest hits of humanity. And it is. It's like the greatest hits, the greatest stories that are most central to our experiences in life are found in the Bible. It's just like the Bible is important. It's integral. I mean, it's like we can't even separate it from who we are. Is like because of the stories are just all the stories are in there. The stories are already who we are, and it's kind of like the living word or something. And when there's a passage you can't go to the God except through Jesus, maybe Jesus is kind of like a separator from the entire world, separates us from God. But Jesus is kind of like a technology that is meant to do that, that keeps everybody safe for however long, for as long as we define the era to him. And it's kind of like as we see this like more empowerment of women, and people say things like we're entering the age of Aquarius, or possibly an age that is defined by something other than what we're defining it by now. We do continue to live in an era defined by competing egos and men that are rewarded for that. I feel like what gives men the platform to do that is we're in an era defined by who can be the best man. Who is the best man is what we title it. But like, what I was saying was if humanity was a individual and they went inside a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist would be like, what is your problem with dogs? Like, why do dogs frequently come up so much? Because like I'm saying it's okay to look at humanity at the scope of an individual. Like, do go there if you want to. Go to that length. Look at all of humanity as one thing. And then you would see that, like, well, humanity kind of has this thing with dogs where they always want to have them around and they keep bringing them up. And Jesus in the Bible, I looked up a couple verses like Jesus talking about dogs, and it's always negative. Jesus does not concern himself, does not associate himself with dogs. He always talks about them in the worst ways. And I'm going to title this episode Christ. And Christ means the Messiah, the anointed one. And he is like he's the guy, right? Christ means the anointed one, or the chosen one. He is the guy. He's that guy. But like Christ, and I'm not saying, and so at different episodes on this podcast in the past, I'm saying like I am the thing that I'm talking about. I do that sometimes. Don't do that every time. I'm not saying that I am Christ. Just so you know, I'm not trying to say that at all. But this is an interpretation of it. And I did wear a white shirt today. That's just coincidence. I don't normally wear a white shirt. It's just all my other shirts are dirty. But because Jesus might wear a white t-shirt, I don't know. I don't know if he does for certain, but Christ is... A psychiatrist would be like, what's this Christ thing? Because that's what would come up. Like a psychiatrist would have a field day with this with humanity. Like, why are you contained by this? So why is this such a problem with you? Where it's like, it always goes back to that and it does always go back to that because we're always contained by it, because time is one of these things that we don't understand. We aren't able to break it down and define it. And we're not able to do that because it is relatively more unintelligent to view something as one thing, where it's like if you broke it down or understood time as different categories rather than that you had to name all of it one timeline, then you would, if you're breaking it down to call it different things, then you are defining it more specifically, discerning it more specifically. You're approaching time in a more intelligent way. We don't understand time because it's like one thing. And so the Christians look at Jesus and they say that he is the answer, he is the savior. And it's like making lots of money is with the rich man trying to get into heaven, having lots of money is the same thing as being safe too. Being saved is like having resources. Being safe is arriving at wealth where now you're safe. You don't have to worry about what's going to happen. And it's the same, like kids can enter into the kingdom of heaven because they're also, you understand, in a position where they don't have a lot of money. Kids don't have any money. And so they're already kids, you would know, are already not in a position where they're wealthy and so can achieve that. So like having a lot of wealth, I guess, is a little bit adulterating, probably. Probably to obtain the wealth, you maybe had to get your hands dirty. Or, I mean, you would have had to be more wise in the ways of the world. It's more adulterating, probably, to get more money. And so it's like, yeah, but a psychiatrist maybe would want to bring up that to humanity. Like, what is this issue? Because humanity can't get past it. We always want this thing to be making us safe, keeping our environment safe, wanting this to be the thing that makes us all right. Jesus is that. Jesus is like provides the standard of safety. And so a psychiatrist maybe ask what's going on. And it's just that, like, so today there were like 2 or 3 things that I wanted to say. So Christ, I think, is kind of a different attitude than Jesus, probably, if you really want to think about it. Christ is like a different thing than Jesus. He totally is. Believe you me. Christ a different thing from Jesus. Those are different vibes, but like Indigenous Peoples Day is the day that they're replacing Columbus Day with. And I live in Columbus. I kind of wonder if are they going to change the name of Columbus, the city, to Indigenous Peoples? They might have to because it's currently named after Columbus. But what's funny is that we have a heart for the Native Americans now because we're so aware and we're so good as a group of people that we recognize that we slaughtered all the Indians. We're like, wow, we really pat ourselves on the back a lot just for recognizing this. Like, well, we remember when we slaughtered the Indians, how shitty are we? But it's almost like people love it. People love this. They're like, wow, think about that. But like people that keep bringing it up, like, remember historically when we slaughtered all the Indians? People say it's to criticize our past, but like we're so good for recognizing how horrible that was, and now we want to treat the Native Americans the right way. It's like that certainly wouldn't happen today, is how people act. Even though, just look at the state of Hawaii for a minute. What's going on there? There's Native people in Hawaii that are from there, native indigenous people to Hawaii, and they're still living there, and they hate us, by the way. I wonder why. I can't imagine why that would be. Why do the people in Hawaii hate Americans? Is it because English people just brought their English heritage over to Hawaii and then just flattened them out with it, just imposed that title over it? And like, Hawaii, now you're a united state, so deal with that. Like, what I'm saying is that Hawaii is not a united state because it's out in the ocean, but the United States is like, well, you're a united state now. Well, it's kind of like it's an own island with its own indigenous people, and they still live there, and we could move off of it whenever we want, be like, well, we give you back your land because we recognize the importance of indigenous people that America has taken over, that America took their land. We're like, well, like people act like, well, if the Indians were around now, we'd give their land back, which is nowhere near the truth, because over in Hawaii, we can make them their own thing whenever we want. It doesn't make any sense that they're one of the states. How are they united with us when they're their own people? And it's really like the United States wanted a better brand, or they wanted like a shiny number of states, like, oh, we need 50 or something. I mean, it's just like it's for power. We don't need Hawaii. And so if we really respected indigenous people, one thing we could concede is just this. If you really wanted 50 states, why didn't you just divide New Mexico? Um, Tell me that. Tell me, why didn't you just divide New Mexico? Divide any of them. New Mexico is already a joke. Like, it's already dumb that you're creating more states just to get more of them. But I mean, I'm okay with New Mexico being a state. It's just I'm not going to respect it necessarily. Like those states down there that were the latest to enter the union, I still consider them to be pretenders, and the rest of the country does too. Like, what is the culture of Arizona? Basically none. It's just old people that retired there and now like the Phoenix Suns, even though they weren't originally from there. Like, I have a hard time believing in, because Arizona and New Mexico should probably just have a lot of people that are native to the area or of Mexican heritage. Like, it's just kind of like the white cultures that result, the culture of New Mexico, the culture of Arizona. I have a hard time buying into that, and the rest of the country does too. Not that like obviously every state is a little bit like that, because it's not like Missouri was around for forever, but New Mexico, you're just nobody's buying that. Nobody's like, I can't wait to figure out the foods and the traditions that New Mexico has created for separating itself from Mexico. New Mexico blows. Old Mexico, please. Old Mexico is like 1,000 times better than New Mexico. Culturally speaking, New Mexico blows. There's nothing going on there. How am I supposed to get excited about New Mexico? That's the point that I'm making. But anyway, I must have spoken faster, so I actually got through a lot of things, and this is a more dense episode. Um, so Arizona is just out there, and that's. I mean, you start to think about Arizona, but we need the Grand Canyon. Got to get that Grand Canyon. Got to get that part of it. Don't forget to include the Grand Canyon. It's what Thomas Jefferson, it's what the founding fathers said. They're like, well, all of this will be for naught if we don't one day take over Arizona and get the Grand Canyon. You know, what would really be the cherry on top is if we also took Hawaii. That's what the founding fathers said. It says it in the Constitution. It's one of the first things it says. It's like, we will be getting Hawaii eventually. It's just like, seriously, stop occupying Hawaii, the United States. Stop calling it a state, just because the English like territory. I mean, you can give it back. You can give it back whenever you want. They're not going to do that because Hawaii has to have a number of exports that we benefit from. America is not going to give up something that's making it money. But seriously, raise awareness for Hawaii needs to be free. But anyway, like, the world maybe, like, Jordan Peterson kept going on talking about, Jordan Peterson is still on his bullshit, and he is essentially up to no good. Even though it looks like he's up to good, he's bringing a lot of awareness to the Bible, because currently, modern day, Jordan Peterson, a lot of his messages are centered around how the Bible is so standard to our way of life. And it's like, there are a lot of people that used to like Jordan Peterson that don't like him now just because he kept going on his bullshit. Like, he doesn't stay in the same place. And it's really like, the things that Jordan Peterson says, people will be really excited about them in like 5 years. But so the things he's saying right now, people don't realize it's just kind of really good content, really interesting things he's saying, I would say. But like, maybe it's important for the world to come to grips with our relationship with Jesus, or like approach it like it's a problem, because Christians say it's the greatest answer. People who identify as sinners, people denying the reality of it, I would say that perspective is Jesus is a problem, kind of automatic. What goes along with that is like this thing that is the greatest answer. A different perspective, which is like, easily you'll find people in life who have an opposing perspective to you, and they might be looking at the same thing, but they just look at it in the negative sense. opposite way. But like really, you can't say that there's Jesus say it's only that he's the greatest answer, because it's like half the world is just wants nothing to do with it, and that's the group of people that is like, this thing is actually a problem. And so in that sense, it's like maybe humanity needs to do something like approach what it is about the figure, the image, the representation, because just like psychologically speaking, Jesus has a major hold on the world, you know. Psychologically speaking, we're like, we can't get it out of our brains. This is like a fixation that and if you really want to think about it, why is that the fixation? Why is that the thing? And so like Jordan Peterson comes along, he's somebody who's up to no good, kind of like Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a book series about a boy that, I mean, he's kind of like a little Satan boy who defeats the Dark Lord. And really, the Lord is dark from Satan's perspective. Like from the perspective of a little Satan boy, the Lord would be like the Dark Lord, or it's like that's the thing that's bad. And so people will say, and actually Jordan Peterson says also, Harry Potter is this book series that's an analogy for Christianity, where it's like Harry Potter is actually God's chosen servant, and he's defeating Satan. And that's what it's an analogy for. But I think actually it is not that. And like I think if you really want to be honest about it, it's about a Satan person who wants to defeat God. That's what the books are about, and that's why it's this so profound, makes so much money, has such a profound impact on the world. This scenario, this world that J.K. Rowling envisioned, it's not easy to create new stories because we have so many stories that are already around, are like fairy tales and shit like that we're still processing them, and they just keep coming up over and over again. But it's hard to make new fairy tales for the modern day that are like wildly successful, that it's like you create this new vision, because in order for it to be that successful, it does apply to the world in some sense. So it's kind of like J.K. Rowling is, I believe she's a Satanist, but she has she says Satanist things. She has Latin phrase tattooed on herself and I think she has like a satanic symbol tattooed on herself too, that is like overtly, like that's one of the main Satan symbols. I think she does, but she has a phrase tattooed on her arm that says salve et coagula or something, and it means dissolve and coagulate, or in other words, disintegrate and integrate, destroy and recreate something, death and then rebirth. But what I find important about it is that it starts with death, and then it starts with destruction, and then it gets better, is what this phrase is saying. But that's something that a Satanist would have tattooed on their arm. Something a Satanist would say, Satanist has a perspective that it starts with destruction, because it's supposed to be that it starts with life. But it's really like saying that death is the beginning, and then after that is life. But that's what's unique and significant about the perspective, is like it's usually always the case that we like to think of that birth starts and then death. But if you're going to consider the entire cycle, objectively speaking, there's no reason to start with birth and then say death, because like things die and then they're reborn. Like the seasons, the leaves falling, like the trees appear as dead and then they're reborn in the spring. Like I'm just talking about cycles, whatever cycle you want to picture as life and then death and then life again, that keeps happening as long as it's cycling. Like death and then rebirth, there's no reason to start with life. It's just that it's perverted to start with death. And so that is like, it's more perverted, it's more Satanist. That's what the phrase says. It starts with disintegrating as opposed to integrating. And besides that, like recognizing those two things to be alongside each other is satanic, the same way that the Freemasons believe that good and evil are the same thing. recognizing those things to be like equivalent is a little bit evil. Like almost like recognizing the entire cycle objectively is a little bit evil. It's like the Rolling Stones. The stone keeps rolling. It's a cycle that keeps continuing rather than that we can see what you are. You're a shapeshifter or something. And and like it's more evil. That's why they're like the kings of rock and roll. Rock and roll is evil. If you're really good at rock and roll, you make lots of albums. And you're not, and Satan is like the king of music or whatever. But I'm just saying about how this analogy that J.K. Rowling created, and she is a Satanist, like those things that the Christians say about Harry Potter is evil, I think they're right. I think that it is evil because it basically chronicles a Satan boy defeating the Dark Lord. And so in my opinion, it's an analogy for how he's defeating Jesus specifically. And that's what the books are about. But he's just up to no good. And it says that in the books. He's like, he can only get to where he's going because he's solemnly swears that he's up to no good. I mean, when he opens the Marauders map or whatever, and that helps him out. But he's worthy of it because he is a person who is up to no good. Harry Potter is a troublemaker. Really, Jordan Peterson is the same kind of thing, but he's probably somebody who's trying to bring about the next things that we're going to have to process in life. I think that what is coming in the future, maybe in the near future, maybe in the far future, I don't know, is more of a ultimatum of sorts, or we need to recognize what is our relationship to Christ. And Christians, I would say, are right in some senses because all they can talk about is the importance of the relationship to Christ. And I feel like they are projecting in some senses a need on behalf of all of humanity to acknowledge that everybody in the world has this relationship to Christ, I would argue, because we're all counting his years. Everybody literally has a relationship to this the same way that time is relative, and speaking of time generates discussion of relative truths and relationships. Like, for example, the relationship of Jupiter to the sun is what determines what is the perception of time on Jupiter, like how long a year is, or it's spinning in a day. Time and relationships just go hand in hand. And Christians are always like, it's about the relationship. And relativity and relationships, that's always dictating what the specific perception of time is. And the world's specific perception of time is a certain thing, but then we name it something to get even more. I mean, it's a little bit like it's like removing yourself from reality, but reality isn't that great. Like, so I'm not saying that. I'm saying that maybe the world needs to come to terms with this relationship that they have, process it, and it's not something that's going to make me want to go to church, because I know what the church's version of Christ is. And I'm disagreeing with that. I'm presenting my own version of it. And so just so you know. But yes, basically those are the things that I wanted to say, and I will continue to explain what I'm doing with this podcast. Also, I realized in the past episode, like, the entire thing wasn't a joke. Like, it was a joke, it's kind of serious. I did realize as I was going into making that episode that, like, maybe I do want to stop this version of this podcast, and then maybe I will make this a finite number of episodes. It'll definitely be more than 100, but I think I will stop counting the number, and then I'll take a break the same way I did between this one and Identity. I think maybe I'll have a finite number of episodes for this, and then I'll take a break, and then do something else after that, after I take a break from it. Possibly. I believe that that's what I want to do with it now. And it's like, initially when I started out, I'm like, maybe this will be the thing that I do forever, because currency is like, you could make it go forever because as long as it's current. And that's partially why I title it that. But yes, like a finite number of episodes, and I want to present a complete thought, maybe, is what I realized. And so I'm Yes, I was sort of serious, sort of joking, but thanks for listening. Subscribe to my YouTube, comment underneath it, comment what you want. It is controversial. We're talking about Christ, so. But you don't have to if you don't feel compelled. Did you know that? Did you know about the things that you don't have to do as spoken to you by me? I hope so. Talk to you later.